that we. So,
That's so true.
Yeah.
One thing, and I would have even actually not give her any, is she said, well, like, I guess that's just what, like, they did back then.
Yeah.
She should have followed that up with saying something along the lines of, and I understand that that's a departure from the way I've talked about this before.
The joke hit like a lightning bolt, sharp, precise, and impossible to ignore. The audience erupted, but Greg Gutfeld wasn't just cracking jokes for laughs. He used the moment to call out what he saw as blatant hypocrisy, and he didn't hold back. For years, Sunny Hostin built her platform on demanding accountability, especially regarding historical injustices. She's been vocal, loud even, about how ancestry shapes moral responsibility, insisting that people must acknowledge and atone for the past. But when the conversation shifted to her own lineage, everything changed. Instead of confronting the uncomfortable truth, she brushed it off like an insignificant footnote in history. Gutfeld wasn't about to let that slide. With razor-sharp precision, he pointed out how identity politics can backfire when personal. Narratives clash with inconvenient realities. It's easy to call out others, but what happens when the same standards are applied to you? Sunny had spent years holding others accountable for their ancestors' actions, until the heat was turned on her. Suddenly, the rules changed. Gutfeld's breakdown was brutal yet calculated. He didn't just highlight the contradiction. He stressed why self-awareness is crucial when discussing weighty topics like race and history. He laid it out plain and simple.
Funny, she's so wrapped up in identity and she had no idea who she was.
Well, now we understand why she always makes Whoopi get the coffee.
Exactly, because if she is shaming descendants of this, will she continue to do that when she is now one of them?
If you're going to use ancestry as a moral yardstick for others, then you better be prepared to measure yourself by the same standards. And here's where the irony kicked in. Sunny, who has long condemned the legacy of oppression, found herself tied to the very system she so passionately criticized. But instead of reflecting, acknowledging, or even addressing it, she sidestepped the issue completely, almost as if it wasn't worth discussing. That reaction didn't sit well with many people. Gutfeld's commentary resonated with those tired of selective outrage and performative morality. It was a stark reminder of what happens when self-righteousness collides with inconvenient truths. And in that moment, Sunny's credibility, at least in Gutfeld's eyes, took a serious hit. But this wasn't just about Sunny. For Gutfeld, it was a prime example of how personal accountability often takes a back seat to public outrage. And once the internet caught wind of it, the fallout was immediate. Social media went into full meltdown mode. Memes, jokes, and hot takes spread at lightning speed. One viral post summed up the irony perfectly. Reparations? Let me write that. Check to myself real quick. Twitter and TikTok became battlegrounds of sarcasm and heated debates. Some defended Sunny, arguing that she shouldn't be judged for the actions of her ancestors.
In her defense, everyone has ancestors that did unspeakably horrible things. It's just that not everyone's ancestors have records tied to their DNA about it. Worried for Sunny Hostin's progeny in the future that do a DNA test and find out that they were related to a cast member of The View. And they're like, oh, it all makes so much sense now. Why I'm so stupid and fat.
But a whole lot of people couldn't ignore the contradiction. For years, Sunny insisted that others must reckon with their family's past, even if they had nothing to do with it. But when the tables turned, when it was her history in the spotlight, she brushed it off with a casual shrug, calling it just a fact of life. That response did not sit well. It sparked a massive debate. Should public figures like Sunny be held to the same moral standards they impose on others? Critics were ruthless, saying her reaction lacked the self-reflection and growth she had demanded from so many others. The hypocrisy was too blatant to ignore, and the backlash didn't disappear overnight. It fueled discussions for weeks. The controversy even spilled into The View, turning the usually lively debate show into an awkward staring contest. When the bombshell about Sunny's ancestors dropped, the energy at the table vanished in an instant. Whoopi Goldberg, always quick with a comeback, looked stunned. Even she seemed unsure of what to say. Sunny, who's usually fierce in her arguments, suddenly had little to add. The irony was too thick to cut through. Meanwhile, over on Gutfeld's panel, the mood was entirely different. His co-hosts wasted zero time diving in, throwing sharp yet playful jabs that had the whole table cracking. Up. One panelist quipped, "Guess Sunny's next segment should be about shaming herself."
Guess there's nothing worse than to find out you're a white woman.
She's so disappointed.
It's really disappointing.
Her mother was white.
Oh my God.
shame.
Oh my God.
The horror. History, and finds out that this is fantastic. She is descended from slaveholders. She's descended from slaveholders, and she's been apparently getting a lot of mail about her call for reparations because it turns out she's going to be paying them and not actually receiving.
The laughter wasn't just for show. It was their way of hammering home what they saw as massive cracks in her moral high ground. But not everyone was there just to joke. Rosie O'Donnell stepped in with a more measured take, cutting through the noise. She made one key point. People should be judged by their actions, not by their ancestors. At the same time, she acknowledged a bigger issue: how identity politics often oversimplifies history, reducing complex issues to narratives that don't always hold up under scrutiny. This revelation about Sunny's lineage, Rosie argued, was a prime example of why rigid narratives can be dangerous. Because when the script gets flipped, contradictions become impossible to ignore. This divide in reactions was impossible to miss. Some saw it as a necessary conversation about personal accountability. Others believed it was just another case of identity politics backfiring. Either way, one thing was clear: Sunny's response didn't sit right with a lot of people, and that's what made things even more frustrating for her critics. Sunny had a golden opportunity in front of her. This could have been a moment of self-awareness, an actual reckoning with her own words. She could have used this revelation to spark a deeper discussion about how history shapes us, how we confront uncomfortable truths, and how personal responsibility should be applied fairly, across the board. But instead, she dismissed it. Just a fact of life. For someone who built a career on demanding accountability, that casual dismissal hit hard. This wasn't just about a personal contradiction. It was about credibility. Had she leaned into the irony, admitted the difficulty of reconciling her family's past, and used the moment for real dialogue, she could have shifted the narrative entirely. But by avoiding reflection, she didn't just let the moment slip away, she made it even bigger. And now, the conversation isn't about history anymore. It's about her. This could have been a defining moment, one that reminded people that nobody's history is simple or free from contradictions.
If you average out the View hosts, among the dumbest people on television.
Sunny's dumb. Certainly not the brightest person. And what she just said just doesn't make any sense. It's just like so silly to say. It's not a well thought out. It's like if you had an idea for a premise and it was totally baked and half baked and you went on stage with it and it's nothing.
Just
there.
go for it.
But instead of using it for meaningful reflection, Sunny's reaction turned it into yet another debate about double standards. Her situation is a textbook example of how moral certainty crumbles when inconvenient truths come to light. She spent years insisting that others must reckon with their history. But when it came to her own, the rules suddenly changed. And that raised the big question: if you demand accountability from everyone else, shouldn't you be willing to hold yourself to the same standard? And if she thought the controversy would just blow over, the internet had other plans. Viral memes, endless social media reactions, and Greg Gutfeld's sharp commentary ensured that this moment wasn't fading into the background anytime soon. Now, Sunny faces a choice: address the backlash head-on and try to reclaim the narrative, or ignore it and risk letting the scandal define her public image. Either way, the timing couldn't be worse for her, because this isn't even the biggest problem on her plate right now. That's right.
I want a citizen that has a policy. I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer on his podcast that says, this is misinformation? How about removing some of the podcasts that disseminate this misinformation?
They have.
And that's
listen.
While Sunny dodges questions about her own accountability, Her husband, Dr. Emmanuel Hostin, is caught in a legal firestorm. And this is where things really get wild. The story attic has long been shrouded in controversy, accused of shortchanging doctors, rejecting legitimate claims, and exploiting loopholes to avoid paying out. But this lawsuit isn't just about exposing corruption in the medical field. It's a full-scale battle between two powerhouses, each trying to paint the other as the true villain. Dr. Host's defense team isn't backing down. His attorney, Daniel Thwaites, came out swinging, calling the lawsuit completely baseless. According to him, this isn't about justice. It's about addicts scrambling to recover financial losses by scapegoating doctors. Thwaites accused the insurance company of using legal theatrics to deflect from their own shady business practices. But he didn't stop there. In a classic courtroom maneuver, he flipped the script, making Attic look like the real bad guys. His strategy turned the accuser into the accused, arguing that insurance companies have been playing dirty for years. Now that they're taking financial hits, they're trying to drag doctors down with them. It's a high-stakes gamble, but in a case this massive, every narrative matters. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more chaotic, Joe Rogan entered the conversation. The podcast king wasted no time calling out The View for what he saw as pure hypocrisy. Rogan reminded everyone that Sunny Hostin has spent years tearing into public figures, acting as if she had all the medical answers because her husband is a doctor. But now, that same credibility she once flaunted is under fire. And the irony is impossible to ignore. This latest scandal doesn't just challenge the lawsuit. It forces people to reconsider how much trust they should place in media, personalities. Is Sunny really the moral authority she claims to be? Or is she just another TV figure dodging accountability?